The Wilhelm Gustloff. On January 30th, 1945, this German military transport ship became the site of the deadliest maritime disaster in recorded history. Over 9,400 people died in the freezing waters of the Baltic Sea. To put that in perspective, the Titanic claimed approximately 1,500 lives. The Gustloff's death toll was more than 6 times that number. Built in 1937 as a cruise ship for the Nazi regime's Strength Through Joy program, the Wilhelm Gustloff was designed to showcase German engineering and provide leisure travel for loyal citizens. At 684 feet long, she was a floating palace meant to demonstrate the supposed superiority of the Third Reich. But by January 1945, as Soviet forces advanced westward, the ship had been converted into a desperate vessel of evacuation. On that fateful winter evening, the Gustloff departed from Gottenhafen in Nazi-occupied Poland, now known as Gdynia. The ship was catastrophically overcrowded. Official capacity was around 1,800 passengers. Instead, somewhere between 10,000 and 10,600 people crammed aboard. The exact number will never be known, because proper manifests weren't maintained during the chaotic evacuation. Most passengers were civilians, German refugees fleeing the advancing Red Army, mothers clutching infants, elderly couples who had lost everything, children separated from their parents in the chaos. There were also wounded soldiers, naval personnel, and young submarine trainees. The temperature outside hovered around 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the ship, people stood shoulder to shoulder in corridors, cargo holds, and drained swimming pools. Captain Friedrich Petersen faced an impossible decision. The Baltic Sea was infested with Soviet submarines. Standard protocol demanded sailing in convoy with destroyer escorts and keeping lights off. But with so many pregnant women and children aboard, he requested permission to travel through shallow waters closer to shore, to activate navigation lights, and to maintain a slower speed. Permission was granted for the lights. It would prove to be a fatal mistake. Visu submarine periscope view through dark waters. At approximately 9:08 p.m., Soviet submarine S-13, commanded by Captain Alexander Marinesko, spotted the illuminated ship. Marinesko had been drinking heavily earlier that day and was actually facing potential court-martial for disciplinary issues. Redemption through a significant military victory might save his career. He ordered 4 torpedoes fired at the massive target. 3 struck the Wilhelm Gustloff. The first torpedo hit the bow where approximately 1,000 people, mostly female naval auxiliaries, were quartered. They died almost instantly as freezing water exploded through the compartments. The second struck beneath the drained swimming pool where refugees had gathered. The third disabled the engine room, cutting all power and sealing the ship's fate. Panic erupted in complete darkness. With no power, the ship's intercom system failed. Emergency lighting barely functioned. The few lifeboats available were frozen to the deck or damaged by the explosions. Even if they'd been operational, there were only enough boats for half the ship's official capacity, nothing close to what was needed for the actual number aboard the ship listed heavily to port, making it nearly impossible to launch boats from the starboard side. Passengers trampled each other in the pitch-black corridors. Parents lost children in the screaming chaos. The temperature of the Baltic Sea was approximately 36 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time in water. That cold? 15 to 30 minutes maximum. People who made it into the water faced a horrifying reality. Life jackets became death traps as the extreme cold caused limbs to stiffen. Those who couldn't swim properly became exhausted within minutes. Hypothermia set in almost immediately. Many drowned before rescue vessels could arrive. The Wilhelm Gustloff sank in just over 40 minutes. Of the estimated 10,600 people aboard, only 1,239 survived. Entire families were erased from existence. The youngest survivor was an infant found floating in a wooden washtub. Some survivors later reported seeing the frozen faces of children pressed against portholes as the ship went down, trapped inside sealed compartments, watching the adults outside unable to help them. Here's the detail that makes this tragedy even more complex. The Wilhelm Gustloff was technically a legitimate military target. She carried military personnel and equipment. Under the laws of war, Marinesko was within his rights to attack. But did he know how many civilians were aboard? Soviet records remain ambiguous on this point. Marinesko was actually denied the Hero of the Soviet Union award immediately after the attack, likely due to his disciplinary record. Only in 1990, decades later, was he posthumously awarded the title. The tragedy of the Wilhelm Gustloff remained relatively unknown in the West for decades, overshadowed by the end of World War II and the larger horrors that came to light. The Empress of Ireland, May 29, 1914, it's all 14, the Empress of Ireland. Just 2 years after the Titanic disaster, another luxurious ocean liner met a catastrophic end in Canadian waters. On May 29, 1914, this Canadian Pacific steamship collided with a Norwegian coal ship in the thick fog of the St. Lawrence River. Within 14 minutes, 1,012 people were dead. 14 minutes. That's less time than it takes to watch 2 episodes of a sitcom. In that brief window, an entire cross-section of early 20th century society vanished beneath the cold waters. The Empress of Ireland was considered the pride of Canadian Pacific's fleet. At 570 feet long, she regularly carried passengers and mail between Quebec City and Liverpool, England. On that late May evening, she departed Quebec City with 1,477 people aboard. Passengers ranging from wealthy first-class travelers to poor emigrants seeking new lives, plus a full crew. Among the passengers were members of the Salvation Army traveling to an international Congress in London. Of the 176 Salvation Army members aboard, 130 died. Their loss devastated the organization's Canadian branch and created a leadership void that took years to fill. Captain Henry Kendall commanded the Empress. If that name sounds familiar, it should. This was the same Captain Kendall who, 3 years earlier, had achieved fame by recognizing and reporting the disguised fugitive Dr. Holly Harvey Crippen aboard his ship, leading to one of the first arrests by wireless telegraph. Kendall was experienced, respected, and careful. As the Empress approached the wider Gulf of the St. Lawrence, fog began rolling in. This wasn't unusual for the region, but it was thick, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Captain Kendall ordered the ship's speed reduced and activated the foghorn's standard precautions. At approximately 1:30 a.m., the crew spotted the lights of another vessel, the Norwegian coal ship Storstad. The two ships exchanged fog signals. Both captains believed they understood the other's position and intended course. Both were wrong. In the confusion of fog signals, changing currents, and misinterpreted navigation lights, the ships turned directly toward each other. By the time anyone realized the error, collision was inevitable. The Storstad's bow, reinforced for icebreaking, struck the Empress of Ireland on the starboard side, creating a massive hole below the waterline. The impact occurred at approximately 1:55 a.m. The Storstad's engines were in reverse, trying to back away. But this actually made things worse. As the Norwegian ship pulled out, it opened the wound wider, allowing the St. Lawrence River to pour into the Empress at a catastrophic rate. Captain Kendall immediately grasped the situation's severity. He ordered the watertight doors closed and tried to run his ship aground on the nearby shore. A desperate but sound strategy that might have saved hundreds of lives, but the damage was too extensive, the flooding too rapid. Within minutes, the Empress listed so severely that launching lifeboats became impossible on one side of the ship. Water rushed into the lower decks where most passengers slept. Many drowned in their cabins, never fully waking to understand what was happening. Others made it into corridors only to find exits blocked by the ship's extreme list. The electrical system failed quickly, plunging everything into darkness. Those who reached the deck faced a terrifying decision: jump into the 38-degree water or stay with the ship. There wasn't a good option. The Storstad remained nearby, attempting rescue operations, but the Empress sank so quickly that few could reach the Norwegian vessel. 14 minutes after the collision, the Empress of Ireland rolled completely onto her side and slipped beneath the surface. The death toll was 1,477 aboard. Only 465 survived. Entire families perished together. The Salvation Army lost not just members but some of its most talented musicians, a staff band that had been traveling to perform at the London Congress. The loss of these young musicians represented not just individual tragedies but a cultural blow to the organization. The subsequent inquiry laid primary blame on the Storstad, finding that the Norwegian ship had made a serious navigational error in the fog. But the inquiry also noted that both ships could have taken additional precautions. The tragedy highlighted the dangers of heavy maritime traffic in waters known for thick fog and strong currents. The Empress of Ireland disaster should have been one of history's most infamous maritime tragedies. The death toll was enormous. The circumstances were dramatic, but the disaster occurred on May 29, 1914. The Doña Paz, December 20, 1987. The Doña Paz. This Philippine ferry holds the grim distinction of being involved in the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in history. On December 20th, 1987, the ferry collided with an oil tanker in the Tablas Strait. The resulting fire and sinking killed an estimated 4,386 people, though the exact number remains uncertain because, like the Wilhelm Gustloff, The ship carried far more passengers than documented. The Philippines is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands. For most Filipinos, ferry travel isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Inter-island ferries are the buses and trains of the Philippines, used by everyone from business people to farmers bringing goods to market. The Doña Paz was one of hundreds of such vessels operating in Philippine waters. On December 20th, the Doña Paz was traveling from Leyte Island to Manila, the capital. Her certificate allowed for a maximum of 1,518 passengers. Official manifests listed 1,583 passengers and 60 crew members. But survivors and investigators later estimated the actual number aboard was between 4,000 and 4,400 people. This wasn't unusual. Overcrowding on Philippine ferries was, and tragically sometimes still is, common practice. Why the massive discrepancy? Many passengers bought tickets directly from vendors at the dock rather than through official channels. Others simply boarded without tickets, planning to pay crew members directly. Children often weren't counted. The pre-Christmas timing meant the ferry was exceptionally crowded with people traveling home for the holidays or bringing goods to sell at Manila's markets. The ship departed Tacloban City at around 6:30 a.m., beginning what should have been an approximately 24-hour journey. By the evening of December 20th, the Doña Paz was navigating the Tablas Strait, a narrow but heavily trafficked waterway between Mindoro and Tablas Islands. At approximately 10:30 p.m., disaster struck. The oil tanker MT Vector, carrying 8,800 barrels of petroleum products, collided with the Doña Paz. The Vector was being operated by a single mate. The master and other crew members were apparently drinking, leaving an unqualified person in control of a vessel carrying thousands of gallons of highly flammable cargo. The collision punctured the Vector's cargo tanks. Petroleum and gasoline spewed onto the water and across both vessels. The friction from the collision, or sparks from the ship's hulls, ignited the fuel instantly. Both ships became floating infernos within seconds. Imagine the scene. It's 10:30 at night. Most passengers are sleeping or preparing for bed. Suddenly, there's a tremendous crash, and flames explode across the deck and through the passageways. The fire spread so quickly that many passengers were burned alive before they could even reach the exits. Those who made it to the deck faced an impossible choice: burn to death or jump into water covered with burning oil. The petroleum had spread across the ocean surface, creating a ring of fire around both ships. Passengers who jumped often found themselves swimming through flames,